It's episode 558 of the Locked On Texas Rangers podcast. On today's episode, I am breaking down my opening day roster projection, who is going to make this roster, plus a couple of really solid pitching outings from Rangers pitchers in the last spring training game. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On to the Texas Rangers. I'm your host, Brice Paterik, here today talking about Rangers opening day, which is less than 2 weeks away at this point. So excited, have an actual season to talk about. But first, thank you guys so much for making Locked On Rangers your very first listen every single day. If you're not already, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Brice Paterik. Follow the show at Locked On Rangers and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, where we are over 600 subscribers, edging closer to 650. Maybe we will hit 700 by opening day. I'm hoping so. We got less than 2 weeks to do so. So I think we can do that. But I'm so excited to talk about all this stuff. Before we get into the opening day roster projection, which is important stuff, there's a couple of things that I want to take note of. Something that John Heyman said in his podcast, that he suggested that the Rangers are the, quote, most likely... perhaps the most likely to jump in on the Michael Conforto sweepstakes, which, a couple weeks ago, I would have thought, great. A couple of months ago, I would have thought, awesome. This is really great. But at this point, I'm thinking, I'm not so sure about that. Not that I don't like Michael Conforto. He's a one-time All-Star. He is a great left-handed bat. He, provides a lot of depth, and he would have been ideal if you're not getting, say, a Suzuki, to go jump on that. But the Rangers just signed Brad Miller to a 2-year deal. They have Cole Calhoun on a 1-year deal plus an option for next year. They have, a couple other guys that are around that can only be corner outfielders like him. It's just, I don't really understand it. Brad Miller is no longer going to be an infielder. He's not, defensively, he's limited to basically left field and first base at this point. And I don't think he's going to usurp Nathaniel Lowe for the first base job. And I don't think that he's going to usurp Andy Ibanez for the third base job or platoon that either. So I'm not really getting what's happening here. Whenever Leote comes up, then it's going to be, some combination of Cole Calhoun, Willie Calhoun, Brad Miller, and Nick Solak in left field. And, you add one more person into that mix, then it's just really confusing as to why. Now, before the Brad Miller deal, I would have thought, great, that would have been ideal, probably a little bit better than Brad Miller, probably a little bit more expensive, but I think overall better to add a younger bat that can play the outfield and can be reliable left-handed bat in this lineup. But at this point, I don't really get it. If the Rangers do it, fine, they'll make it work, but it's going to be a little bit of a mess, as you're going to see when we get into roster construction, talking about this opening day lineup. But there are a couple of guys who did fairly well in yesterday's outing against the Oakland A's. And the first one that I want to mention is one of the most important ones, is Spencer Howard, which I believe this was his first spring training action, at least the first action that I've seen him in, and he looked great. Absolutely great. I talked about him on yesterday's episode, talking about 5 people who need to have a very big spring training, and he is one of them. He is up there towards the top of the list, but he already had such a great offseason. I think the pressure is down from him a little bit. He was caught in between starting and not starting. He did come out of the bullpen, but again, this is a spring training game, so he probably was only going to go 2 innings for the first outing. And he did. He went 2 perfect innings, struck out 3, made batters look really bad, and was just great. He looked composed. He was in the zone. He had control. He looked like he knew what he was doing. He looked comfortable with his arm angle, which was something that he was, fiddling with a little bit, and that I talked about yesterday, trying to find what is the most comfortable arm angle for him so that he can pitch a little bit deeper into games, feel better about his release point and all that good stuff. John Gray also looked really solid, and this puts him basically on track to be the opening day starter, which we all knew was going to happen. It's not really a question at this point. I don't think Martin Perez is going to usurp him by having some insane spring training. I just don't think that's happening with the contract they gave him and where he is on this staff, unless they signed Clayton Kershaw. he was pretty much always going to be the opening day starter for this team, but he looked solid in a couple of innings, did allow a couple of hits and a run, struck out 4, looked really solid. Matt Moore looked like Matt Moore. He gave up a pair of home runs that weren't particularly soft, also gave up a walk, but struck out 4 in his 2 innings. I don't think he's going to make this roster, as you'll see in just a minute. But another solid outing from John King. Greg Holland looked solid. Brandon Workman had a perfect inning, got the save. The Rangers are now 4-1 in spring training games, so that's fun. They might win a Cactus League title for all the zero that's worth. But I think it was definitely worth mentioning. Those guys doing well. Nick Solak also blasted his second home run of the spring. Andy Ibanez had a multi-hit day and looked pretty solid defensively at third base. I'm pretty sure that job is going to be his. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into this roster projection. I feel pretty solid about this. It also is very similar to what Levi Weaver of The Athletic did in his work. I did not copy his work. It's just at this point, with the realities of things being the same they were, I do have some differences, but all of my hitters are exactly the same. But in fairness, there's only like really 3 choices to make. Everything else at this point feels pretty locked up, being 2 weeks away. Now, let's start at catcher. I'm just going to go with the starting position, and then we'll go to the bench, and then we will get to the pitchers and the bullpen, which is going to be a very large bullpen for the first month of the season. But starting at catcher, real mystery here. It's going to be Mitch Garver. There you go. Solid. It's pretty obvious. He's probably going to hit somewhere in the 3 hole. It's looking like some combination of the middle infielders are going to hit 1-2 in Marcus Semien and Corey Seager. We'll see at this point. But at first base, it's going to be Nathaniel Lowe. I mean, you kind of know what to expect there. Both of those guys are going to be big hitters in this lineup. They're going to be hitting in the top half of the lineup and doing some real damage. The Rangers are going to count on their offense. Marcus Semien is going to be at second base. Corey Seager's at shortstop. Duh. At third base, I don't think it's a platoon anymore. At first, I thought that it was going to be a little bit of a platoon with Andy Ibanez and Brad Miller. But from what I've heard and seen about Brad Miller and his defense at third base, that's not really an option. It's just going to be left field. So third base is pretty much Andy Ibanez's to do with what he can. He has looked really, really solid in the spring. And defensively, I mean, he was pretty fine. He was much better defensively last year than I've ever seen him. He has always been this guy's got to hit a crap ton. Maybe he can stick at second base. Maybe he can stick there. Or we'll try and shove him in left field because he doesn't have a huge arm, which it's about average. It's a little bit better than I initially gave him credit for, but he's made some really good defensive plays at third base. You know, it's no surprise that Adrian Beltre being around there has maybe given him a little bit of an impact. Maybe a few tips from the greatest defensive third baseman of all time, bar none. I don't want to hear any other arguments because it's Adrian Beltre, and that's it. So, but I'm sure being around him definitely helped. Beltre has a 20-year-long major league career. Is one of the greatest to ever do it, defensively, offensively. So being around him is always nice, and it would have been really funny to see him pick up a bat when he did fake like he was going to get in the batter's box at one of the Rangers inter-squad games, but then said no and just walked all the way to the other dugout, which is classic Adrian Beltre. But I think Andy Ibanez is going to stick there at third base. He's going to be there this year. And then Josh Young is probably going to have to fight him off for the starting third base job next year. He might get a little bit of run at DH towards the back end of this year whenever he comes back healthy. Depends on how he recovers from that surgery. But Andy Ibanez is the clear choice at third base. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's encouraging. I just want him to be able to hit righties. That's the only thing that I really need him to improve on this year. Show a little bit more power against those righties. He showed pretty decent power numbers against the lefties, but improve that power against righties. He's not going to walk a whole bunch, but he is going to make a whole lot of contact, so that on base shouldn't be too bad, and the batting average is going to be pretty decent. Just need him to produce some power to be a solid above average third baseman at this point. We're going to get into the infield and a little bit, or get into the outfield and a little bit at what this bench is looking like and what the pitching staff is going to look like. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. That's right. You guys know about Built Bar. It's a new baseball season, which means time for some new Built Bars. They are the best tasting protein bar that has ever been invented. I have checked. I have done the research. I have looked high, low, hither, there, and yon. All of those places have no better protein bars than Built Bar. They are great for you. They taste delicious. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. They have a bazillion different flavors, so no matter what you like, as long as you like chocolate, and they're not even all extremely chocolatey. Some of them are more caramely, some of them are more, minty, some of them's got some coconuts. Like, they've got all kinds of great stuff in there. Most bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar. It usually has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Built Bar, they're all about the taste. So you can taste how they are different. If you go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. Now, if you want to make Locked On MLB Prospects your second listen today, it is hosted by Lindsey Crosby, a prospect encyclopedia. He's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now let's take a look at the outfield. I already have the obvious candidates from catcher to third base. It's really easy. They're all pretty slam dunk. And Andy Ibanez has been the only question mark, but now he has pretty much solidified that what he has said, that he is going to give him that role. He wants to give him some runway to go run with it and dominate out there. But in left field, primarily it's going to be Brad Miller, but it's going to be a little bit of a platoon because he only really hits righties well. He does not hit lefties very well. I'll get into that platoon when I talk about who is on the bench, but he was signed from Philadelphia last year, a multi-year deal for him. He did pretty solidly, 140 games last year, a 774 OPS, 20 home runs, which is just 10 shy. Just 10. It's 10 shy of his career high, but it's only the second time in his career that he's had 20 or more home runs in a season. He had 30 home runs in 2016 with Tampa Bay, one of his few seasons there. In Philadelphia last year, he absolutely mashed against righties. He played a little bit of first base, a little bit of second, some third base as well, and left and right field. But he is basically just going to be a left fielder for the Texas Rangers this year. At a 774 OPS, at 321 on base percentage, and a 453 slugging percentage. The guy just mashes against right-handed pitching. That's the Rangers brought him here for. They did not bring him for his defense. He's probably not going to play the infield as much as some of the other guys. So you will need a couple of guys who can play the infield and, who can play center field. Because at this point, the only center fielder we've gotten to is Adolis Garcia. What can he do this year? Can he come anywhere close to what he did last year at the beginning part of the year? He's going to have a lot more protection in the lineup. I think he's going to be hitting a little further down. He's not going to be hitting in the 3-hole and be basically the only offensive, worrisome bat that opposing pitchers have to face this year, like he was towards the back half of last year. There was a little bit of Andy Ibanez action that was doing pretty well. Nathaniel Lowe was pretty solid, but other than that, there was really not a whole lot of offense going around at pretty much any other part of this lineup once Joey Gallo was traded at the deadline. There was a lot of pressure on him to figure it all out in his first Major League season. He came on and was one of the flashiest, most fun players in baseball for the first month that he was up in May. Made an all-star team, was absolutely deserving, a great defender. He's going to do very well in center field, cover a lot of ground. Probably going to have a few minus defenders on left and right, so he's probably going to have to cover a whole lot more ground. But I think he can handle that because there will be less asked for his bat, and there might be a little bit more asked from his glove this year. But I think he's going to be starting in center field. And in right field, we have Cole Calhoun coming off a really, really rough season. Had a 2-year deal with the Rangers with a option for next year. Played in 51 games last year. A 670 OPS, which was the worst in his career. Actually, scratch that. He did have a 2018 where he had a 652 OPS, but last year was just really rough when he only played in 51 games, 182 plate appearances. But the year before, he was really, really solid, an 864 OPS, which was, if I'm not mistaken, the highest in his career. Yes, by far the highest in his career. Slugged 526. Played in 54 games in that shortened season. 16 home runs, which I believe was among the leaders in the American League. Not the top, but he was still up there in the top 15 or 20 range. But he was really, really solid. He was solid the year before. He had a 792 OPS in an actual full season in 2019 with the Angels as a 31-year-old. Now he's 34. He's a bit of a veteran. I don't know. I think he's fine. I think he's an upgrade, and he's going to be in the bottom, maybe the bottom third of the lineup, but he is a decent veteran bat. This team doesn't have a whole lot of veterans or didn't going into this season. Marcus Semien was one of the few ones that is, going into the lockout. There wasn't a whole lot. There was Cole Calhoun and Marcus Semien, and that was really it on the batting side. Everybody else was a little bit on the younger side, even though Adolis Garcia is 28, I believe, this year. he still has only been in the big leagues for one season. So having those guys that have been around and know what it's like and know what it takes to win, I think it's going to be valuable. It's going to be really solid and useful for the Rangers in right field. At DH, it's going to be the other Calhoun, Willie Calhoun. Gosh, I literally just said this not 3 seconds ago, and I'm already screwing that up. Willie Calhoun has looked really solid in batting at the plate the last couple of games that I have been able to see him in spring training. But again, it is only spring training, so I don't know exactly what to make of it. I don't know. It might get to the point where he is playing a little bit of left field just to get his bat in there. I think his bat might be more valuable than Brad Miller's. I think it's going to be more valuable than Cole Calhoun's by the end of the season, if not at the beginning of the season. He's really struggled to get healthy. I just want him to be able to be healthy to show what kind of hitter he can be. He's a guy who has been projected to be a middle of the order kind of bat for his entire career, but through injuries and getting hit with baseballs and all kinds of other stuff, he has just had no luck to actually play a full season. Hasn't played, I don't even think 100 games in a season yet this year, or yet in his career, but he's definitely capable. I think he's got a lot of potential, and I literally just want him to be healthy. That's all I want for this guy. Yeah, his most games he's played in a season was 83 in 2019. Last year, he came in second in his second most career games with 75, and it was just a rough last couple of years for him. But he's got potential in there. And if he is the number 6 or 7 bat in your order, then that's a half decent lineup, and I'm really excited for it. So we're going to get into the bench in just a second. We're going to talk about the pitching rotation and the bullpen that is going to be very large to start the season with a 28-man roster. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. It's that time of year again as basketball tournament is finally upon us. Some absolute travesty happened last night in this stupid Duke Blue Devils eliminated my beloved Red Raiders, the actual good guys who I know all of you guys were cheering for. If you want to make some bets on whatever games are left in this stupid tournament that has hurt my feelings personally time and time again and will continue to do so, then you can lay those bets on there. Like I said yesterday, the Rangers are a 90% favorite to miss the playoffs according to BetOnline's odds, 90.9, so nearly a 91%. So if you want to go put some money on the Rangers to make the playoffs, sneak in with this slightly expanded playoff picture, then you can go do that at betonline.net. It's where the game starts. Now let's get into this bench. I think it's going to be a 4-man bench. There was some question about who was going to be the backup center fielder. I think we got to start with Jose Trevino, who I think is going to win the backup catching job. It just makes sense. I talked about it a little bit on yesterday's episode, and I think the episode before. But at this point, I think he seems like the likely choice because of his defensive upside, and he already knows the catcher. He already knows the pitching staff, which is tough for Mitch Garver. He's basically got a month to learn an entirely new pitching staff. He has caught a whole bunch of the guys. He caught John Gray yesterday, so he has said that he is very excited about the Rangers being able to get him so much information, but still there's only so much information that you can prepare. You just kind of have to catch these guys for a long time. That's why pitchers and catchers report so much earlier than everybody else, because the pitchers have to learn each other. Learning an entirely new staff in a month is, I believe Levi Weaver called it like children running around with their head on fire or something like that, just in a very Levi way. But I think that's definitely difficult for him. But I know he's going to do a good job, and his bat is way more important than whatever defensive upside he's going to bring. And whatever defensive upside he doesn't have, there's Jose Trevino there to catch whatever games he is unable to catch in. Now, we also have Nick Solak, who I think is going to be part of the platoon in left field. Nick Solak still hit lefties pretty well last year. Brad Miller does not hit lefties at all. Nick Solak can play a decent defensive left field. He's probably not going to play a whole lot of second base with Marcus Semien being an absolute Iron Man there. So left field it is for him. He might play a little bit in center field. He has played there before and has been a little better than expected, but still not great. Not anywhere near what Adolis Garcia can do, and not what ideally you would want a backup center fielder to do. So who does that leave? It leaves Eli White, who has done fairly well in the spring training so far. There was some question about his health, if he was going to be ready, but what he has calmed those concerns and saying, nope, it's fine. He's going to be fine. He's going to be ready for opening day. He already has a home run in 7 plate appearances so far, a .52 OPS for old Eli White, who can play a little bit of the infield, can play every single outfield position, and is fast as all heck. So that pretty much decides who's going to be the backup center fielder, and it provides a little bit of depth. Would like him to be left-handed, but again, most of these guys starting are left-handed, and guys that are going to need a day off in Cole Calhoun and maybe a little bit of Brad Miller. So that's fine. Solid. I didn't really get the Rangers being enamored with him as much as they have been in the past, but I kind of get it now with where the roster is constructed. The bat didn't do a whole lot for me, but I think he's still got some more in there to be a decent bench bat / defensive replacement kind of guy with insane speed. So makes sense, and I think he should definitely win that opening day roster spot. But who's going to play backup infield? Who's going to play shortstop? Yeah, it's going to be Joey Culberson. It just is at this point. I feel like it's pretty much a foregone conclusion. He was solid for the Rangers last year. Nothing too spectacular. 90 games, 271 plate appearances, had a .676 OPS, 5 home runs, 2 triples, 15 doubles, and on base a little bit below 300. It was fine. He can play from shortstop. He can be there. He can, if Corey Seager needs a day off and you don't want to move Marcus Semien over to shortstop off of his now primary position at second base, then you can do that. It gives you some options, some flexibility. He is a veteran. He is well liked in the clubhouse, and he's solid. He's solid. That's fine. So that's what the bench is going to look like in the starting rotation. I think this feels pretty slam dunky at this point. John, at least the first 4: John Gray, Martin Perez, Dane Dunning, Taylor Hearn, and for that 5th spot, I really think Spencer Howard's going to earn it, especially after what I saw from him yesterday. I like it. I think that he can go several innings for the Rangers. I don't know if he's going to consistently go 5 innings necessarily this year, but I think he's definitely well on his way to building up that body of work, building up that endurance to be a starting pitcher. I like what I've seen from him. His potential is very, very high, much higher than most people in this rotation outside of, John Gray. I think his potential is a little bit higher than Dane Dunning. I think it's a little bit higher than Taylor Hearn at this point, and a little bit higher than some of the other guys. Somebody who did come on and surprise me is Brock Burke, who I believe Levi picked to make a spot in the bullpen out of camp. He looks much better than he had any right to coming off of shoulder surgery. I honestly, once I saw he had shoulder surgery and what he did last year, I kind of wrote him off. I thought, okay, I really like this guy. I thought eventually he could be a number 3 in a rotation. I liked him the best of the 3-man group of him and Allard and Joe Palumbo. But the shoulder surgery is a scary thing, but he has looked like he is coming back with a vengeance. He's hitting 97 miles an hour, and I think he might end up factoring into this rotation. He might end up cracking into the rotation. I think he's going to fight Spencer Howard for that last spot. But I think he probably starts the season in AAA, and maybe those two fight it out. Maybe the Rangers go with a bit of a 6-man rotation to ease some of the burden on some of these guys who haven't started a whole lot of games in their career, and what would be the back 3 of a 6-man rotation in Brock Burke, Taylor Hearn, and Spencer Howard. Or I don't know if I say haven't started a whole lot, but haven't started a whole lot recently. So to kind of limit the workload on those guys, maybe do some piggyback starting with a combination of those guys. But those first 3 in John Gray, Martin Perez, Dane Dunning, those guys should let it eat. I hope all of those guys give at least 150 innings this year. That is the goal for them. John Gray, there's a little bit more of a goal than just eat 150 innings. You got to also look pretty decent for the contract the Rangers signed him to, but I think he will. He's shown a lot of potential in Colorado, pitching well in a very, very difficult to pitch ballpark. I don't think it'll be nearly as difficult to pitch in Texas than it was for him to pitch in those Rocky Mountain highs with all those balls that absolutely travel out at Coors Field. But the bullpen, right now, I am going to go with a 10-man bullpen because that's what the Rangers have the option to do. Normally, it's about an 8-man bullpen, but with a 28-man roster, you can really, really get some depth in there. And I think it starts with Joe Barlow, who was a closer last year. I think he's going to be the closer to start this year. Depending on where Jose Leclerc and Jonathan Hernandez look when they come back, they might slot back into that closer's role. I think a little bit of what Joe Barlow did last year, which was great, might have been a bit of a mirage. I don't know that he's going to be a guy who has a sub-2 ERA every single year. But he showed some real progress, and I think he's going to be a solid back end of the bullpen, kind of a reliever. But again, when Jose Leclerc and Jonathan Hernandez are on, they are absolutely nasty, deadly, some of the best relievers in baseball. Now, I think you also have Brett Martin, Spencer Patton, Dennis Santana as a guy who can go multiple innings. John King can also go multiple innings. I really am glad the Rangers didn't give him up last year in the Joey Gallo trade, because he is a guy who has a little bit of control, and I really, really liked what I saw from him last year, despite the injury. They also signed Garrett Richards to a, I believe, 2-year deal to, go that multi-inning role. He was pretty solid for Boston last year. It was a bit of a split between the rotation and starting. He's had a little bit of health issues the last couple of years, actually mainly just in a 3-year stretch from 2016 all the way to 2019. Didn't pitch a whole lot, only pitched more than 50 innings once in those years, and that was in 2018 when he hit just 76. Pitched 51 in the shortened season for the Padres. Last year, he pitched 136 innings in 40 games. 22 of those were starts, and he finished for those games for the Boston Red Sox. 4.87 ERA, not super great. The fielding independent pitching had it about there. His ERA plus was 97, so just a little bit below league average. But I think the Rangers are thinking that if he is in strictly a bullpen role, that he is going to do better and be able to provide them some depth, eat some innings. If you have some of these guys who are not used to a 150 inning season-long workload in the back end of their rotation, like they have at this point with Hearn and Howard and maybe a little bit of Brock Burke. But I think that's a solid pickup. I think he'll be fine. Nothing too flashy or exciting. You also have Colby Allard, which I don't know what kind of a role he'll have. He might have a similar role to that. He has shown he can do pretty well as a piggyback starter. He has shown that he is not really a starter at this point. I don't want to write him off because he is still so young, and it feels like he's been in the big leagues forever, but he came up at, I believe, the age of 20. With the Rangers, I believe he was 21 when he made his first pitch in his first major league action. But still, I've seen it so much, unless there's some tweak that has completely revolutionized everything that he is doing at this point, then I really don't see how he's going to do that. He pitched nearly 125 innings last year, literally one out shy. 17 starts, had a 5.41 ERA, and I don't really see it. I don't really see him as a starter. He's 24 years old this year. He came up, I was right, 21 when he made his Rangers debut, 9 starts in 2019, but he's just shown that he is not quite a starter. He can be a really solid multi-inning bullpen role, but I think that is where he's going to have to be at this point. I think for the last 3 spots of the Rangers bullpen, I think Nick Snyder, I like what I saw from him in a limited sample size. Would have liked to see a little more strikeouts. But I got absolutely nasty stuff. I love a reliever with some glasses. I love any pitcher with glasses. So, of course, I have a soft spot for Dane Dunning. I don't know what it is, but it's just something about that vibe. It gives me just great vibes. So if he can strike out a little bit more, a few more people than he did last year, he's got a pretty solid breaking ball to go with that absolutely filthy, way too fast fastball that's sitting triple digits, and I believe hit up to 102 last year, at least hit 101 on the radar guide. But it is nasty, and it's got a little bit of movement, and it's not just a straight 100 mile an hour. We have Josh Spores for the next to last slot in this bullpen. I keep wanting to write him off because I feel like every time I see him, I only see some of his bad outings. But when he's on, he is really on. Last year, he had a 3.97 ERA in 59 innings for the Rangers. Struck out 69, which is really nice. An ERA plus of 111. Really solid above average pitcher. The fielding independent pitching was about the same as his ERA. Gave up 7 home runs last year in just under 60 innings and walked 32. So I would just like him to cut down on those walk numbers, but the guy's strikeout rate is through the roof. So you love to see that, and that is probably what's going to earn him a spot in this rotation. And the last one, this is the one where I differed from literally everybody else. So look at me being edgy and fun and all that. But I'm going to go with the Viper, Chase Lee, who the Rangers drafted out of Alabama, I believe last year, if not the year before. He was really, really solid in Double-A last year. They need another guy who can do some multi-inning work. I don't think he's going to stay up after the roster detract. I think he's one of the first ones down because he has literally all of the options because he hasn't made the major leagues just yet. But he's pitched in 2 games so far this spring. Only allowed 1 hit, struck out 3, 2 perfect innings. Actually sub-perfect because I literally just said he had 1 hit. But he hasn't walked anybody. Looked really, really solid, and a guy who has been a multi-inning reliever kind of guy. Not always 2 innings, not averaging 2 or 3, but can give you 2 when you need it. At Alabama in his last year, he pitched in 22 games, but had 40 and 2/3 innings, so just under 2 innings per outing. So he's shown that he can do that. And also in Frisco last year, pitched in 13 games and 17 innings, so has that multi-inning ability. Also had 27 strikeouts in those 17 innings and only 3 walks. Really, really liked what I saw from him last year in Double-A. I think the Viper could make his major league debut to start the season on this roster. It would be a lot of fun. It would be a huge upgrade in the lineup. One thing that Levi did that I wanted to steal a little bit and credit him, he put his projected lineup as Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, Mitch Garver, Nathaniel Lowe, Adolis Garcia, Cole Calhoun, Willie Calhoun, Andy Ibanez, and Brad Miller. I like that. I think I would flip Willie and Cole Calhoun, so Willie Calhoun would be hitting 6th, where Cole Calhoun would be hitting 7th. I could even move Cole Calhoun all the way down to 8th and put Andy Ibanez up at 7th, but I'm not sure at this point. But he also did the OPS gained if you take who hit in the 3-hole for the Rangers last year versus who's hitting there now. The upgrade from whoever was there last year to Mitch Garver is a 268-point OPS gain. In the leadoff spot, if Marcus Semien is there, it's a 117-point OPS gain. And from the 2-hole hitter last year to Corey Seager, if he is in the 2-hole this year, be a 245-point OPS gain. Absolutely nuts. The average, I believe, is somewhere in the 110, 120 range in terms of OPS points gained per lineup spot, which would be absolutely insane. This lineup looks really solid top to bottom. There's not a really weak link offensively. Now, defensively in the corner outfield, I think they're going to struggle. Obviously, at first base, I think Nathaniel Lowe is a minus there, but I think Corey Seager should be fine. He might be a little bit below average defensively, but I think with Woody there helping him, Woody was there when Corey Seager was an above average defender at shortstop in his early years. And even though he's had a couple injuries that might have hurt his arm and his shoulder or elbow, I think that he can still be at least an average defensive shortstop. And when he's hitting with an OPS in the 900s at a shortstop role, then as long as it's not terrible, you can absolutely live with some slightly below average defense at shortstop. But that's my opening day roster projection. It might change. There might be some things that happen. My Chase Lee pick might have been too edgy, but I feel pretty good about it at this point. And I'll be back next week. We're going to have hopefully some crossover shows, hopefully a show with everybody in the division talking what the AL West is going to look like this year. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. All that and more. 5 episodes in earnest next week. And then the week after that is the week that baseball comes back. So thank you guys so much for joining me if you're not already. Like I said at the top, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Brice Paterik. Follow the show at Locked On Rangers and subscribe on YouTube. That'll do it for this week's editions of Locked On Rangers. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.